Okay, everybody, this is going to be a quick little demo on Pixlr and using Pixlr to edit our basic edits that you should be really doing every time you want to post or turn in a photo. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share a screen and open up Pixlr for you. Okay, so when you go to Pixlr, it's really super simple. You just type in Pixlr, and you can see I use it all the time, so mine just pops up. Now, how to get a photo into Pixlr, I think most of you guys have figured that out by now, but the main thing is you can only open JPEGs, which we talked about how if you have a new iPhone, you're gonna have to change your default settings from HEIC to JPEG. And two, you have to have them either in desktops, in desktop documents, photos, downloads, something that will come up in this menu that's actually on your computer itself. Okay, you can't open them from the web or whatever. They have to be physically there on your computer. So I did put a few photos in here on my desktop just for you that have problems. I wanted to show you how to fix problems. Okay, so let's look at this one first. Hopefully I picked the right one. Hopefully they all have problems. I picked photos just like snapshots of my family that have really glaringly obvious problems that need to be fixed. This is a picture of my sister eating breakfast in her pajamas. She probably wouldn't appreciate this. But at any rate, there's a big problem with this one. It's very, very orange. It's very yellow in tone. I'm sure you guys have noticed photos that look like this before. There's a good reason for this. The lights in lighting fixtures in your home are called tungsten. That means they are made of basically their light source, what makes them create light. It's a yellowish in tone. It's orangish. It's almost like a fire, right? And the thing is that our eyes don't see it like this. When we look at it, it looks neutral because our eyes are actually adjusting for it. But in truth, the light itself is actually warm. It's physically warm. And so it comes out in the light spectrum as an orangey yellow color. You can see in the background here, these windows are very, very blue. The camera inside of your phone is trying to take a neutral picture. It's trying to balance out that orange, but the camera is very confused in terms of its actual decision making and how it decides how to take the exposure. It can't compensate. It can't change this yellow tone into a neutral tone because I have confused my camera. I have shot a picture that has both the orangey tungsten light in it and the weird daylight stuff in it. So the computer inside your camera doesn't know what to do. And henceforth, it's taking a picture that is orange. And it's making these really, really blue as a result, okay? Now, when I get this, it doesn't mean this image is trash. If you take an image like this and you can't force the camera to take the correct exposure, you actually can go into some cameras, on phone cameras, and change color temperature. You can actually do that. But at any rate, if you got something like this, you can fix it, okay? And all of you out there who don't use Instagram and you're going to be using Pixlr, this is a really good chance just to get familiar with the basic tools on Pixlr. So going over here, crop is a really obviously one you're going to use a lot. Cutout and all that, we're going to get to that. This is a big one, adjust. By the way, if you're doing the Instagram Magic project here on Pixlr, there are plenty of filters here for you to choose from that you can analyze, okay? Plenty, like almost too many. So basically, before I ever post a picture, before I ever turn in a picture or even send it to anyone, I basically make simple adjustments, okay? So here, color. This is big, right? Because this is what our problem is the color. Vibrance, that's not going to do it. You guys probably know what the word vibrance means. It means like how intense, how exciting something is. The problem with this photo isn't that it's not exciting enough. Well, actually, that is a problem, this photo, but that's not the problem I'm trying to fix. Okay, so vibrance, if you crank this up, it's just going to make the colors that are already there more intense. And that's not what I want, right? Saturation. Saturation is going to, sorry, it's hard to get it back to 0. Come on back to 0, mister. Okay, whatever. Saturation. Saturation is actually going to do kind of the same thing as vibrance. And I'm not sure why they have two separate ones. I'm sure there's a slight difference in the way it looks. But saturation is, again, just going to increase. And look, it's actually, saturation looks like it's a very intense tool. It's going to bring about very, very, very intense colors. You turn up the saturation, you're just going to get more of whatever colors are there, which increases contrast. So in some ways, you might want to use this for other purposes, but this ain't right, right? Okay, I'm gonna turn that back down. Can I make it be 0? Yes. Okay, temperature. Oh my God, well, here's the problem right here. The temperature here is not right. The light is too hot, is too warm. And I don't even mean that just like metaphorically. These lights that are in lighting fixtures, light bulbs, are literally warm. They're literally hot to the touch. And they literally produce a warm image, okay? Now, you know, oddly, I feel like taking out vibrance kind of helped because it took some of the color out. But let's go and try to fix the color. Now, Photoshop, you can fix this a lot better, but we don't have Photoshop. Temperature. Let's turn it down. Whoa, check it out. So what I did here is just turn the temperature down, literally like thermostat, like it was too hot. So I turned it a little cooler, right? Now you can't make it perfect because to make it perfect, the image would have to be shot perfect, or we'd have to have Photoshop so we could fix every nuance of this. But you can see it already looks much, much better. And you can see the windows in the back are getting cooler, right? So one thing that happens is as you turn this temperature down, everything is going to get cooler. So the subject, in this case, my sister reading the newspaper here, she's getting cooler. The background's getting cooler. So that would be the only problem with that, is that, you know, you're making a correction to the whole image. But most of the time, something in the background, like windows, really doesn't matter that much, right? So I went ahead and corrected that temperature. I like that. I think that's a good correction. Tint. Let's look at tint. What happens there? Now tint, as you can see, this is a magenta slider over here. So it's gonna add magenta when I go to the left. And over here, it's gonna add cyan, okay? And these two colors, cyan and magenta, they are absolutely the building blocks of the filters that we used to use in the darkroom when we printed color. So I imagine that's why they put that there. But it's honestly, in this case, it's really not that useful as of a tool. You could play around with this with tint and hue and see if you can get the same effect that you get from changing temperature maybe, but I don't think it's very useful. I think it just increases a cast, you know, like I go to the left, it gives me a magenta cast. I go to the right, it gives me a cyan cast. I don't think I like it. What about hue? Whoa. Looks like hue's pretty crazy. Hue is basically adding a whole rainbow, right, of casts to that image. As I go this way, it turns green, and then it turns blue, and then it turns magenta. So here's the good thing about hue, is that I can do something really weird with this. It looks like hue could make things very abstract, which you could use later when we move on to making, I don't know, pop art or whatever. So this is a tool, like all these are tools. But if your goal is to make it look normal, this tool is not going to do it for you. Although it's probably part of a lot of the filters that are on here, probably have hue adjustments in it because there's some pretty weird filters in Pixlr. Okay, and this, I do not want any of this. So I got to get back to 0 no matter what, no matter how difficult. You know what I need is a good mouse on here. Good old fashioned real mouse. Not the kind of mouse that runs around your house though. I like that. Okay, awesome. So that's color adjustments, right? And then we have brightness. Now this is tricky because brightness and exposure, to me, they would be the same thing. But brightness is a tool that only exists in an editing program, whereas exposure describes when you actually take the picture. So when you take the picture, your camera is evaluating the scene in front of it, right? And making an exposure decision. So when you push the button, your camera is actually making all of these decisions for you, trying to expose the scene properly, right? So this exposure tool on here is really supposed to be to compensate if you did not take a correct exposure or your phone did not take the correct exposure. When we go back to school, there's a whole lot more there because we have real cameras where we can really control the exposure. Right now, we just have these little automatic sensors in our cameras. There are some tricks to trick your camera, but we'll talk about that in another video. So let's see what happens. Brightness. When we crank up the brightness, what happens? It's literally just pushing the exposure all the way to the right, which makes it brighter. To me, that tool is meh. I don't generally use that. Sometimes I'll use exposure if my exposure really is wrong for whatever reason. You can see it has a subtle kind of effect where you can pump up that exposure. And I think that's pretty worthwhile. And here's everybody's favorite tool. It's hard not to use it too heavy-handed, but let's look at contrast. We turn up contrast. Now, in this case, it is increasing the blacks and the whites. But the gray areas, and it's hard to see gray in a color image, but in color images, you want to think of gray as like all the middle tones, the ones that aren't black or white. The middle tones are getting lost. They're getting muddled and they're disappearing. Now, maybe that's okay with you. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe you want to see it contrasting no matter what, right? But for me, that would be too heavy-handed, especially since this image is obviously just like a family photo. It's not meant to be a work of art, right? I would maybe increase the contrast a little bit, but I actually don't usually use this tool either. It's too heavy-handed. It doesn't give me enough control. I usually use these two tools. I love the highlight and shadow tools because I can increase the contrast without, I can increase the contrast separately without letting the midtones fall away, right? So for me, these shadows down here, this is the darkest area, they should be blacker. So I'm just gonna crank up the shadows just a little bit. But if you cranked them all the way up, let's see what happens. You can still see that I'm increasing those. Wait, I think I'm actually lightening the shadows that side. Let's see what happens when I go this way. Yeah, totally. Okay, so when I go to the left, I'm darkening up those shadows a little bit. And I like that. One of the things we talk about a lot when we were shooting film was making sure we had a true black somewhere in the image, just one true black. It makes the whole image contrastier. It makes it pop. And you can see I've decided on not very much adjustment here, but you might decide on more. Highlights, let's turn those up. I feel like it's moving slow. So now I've specifically just turned up the bright spots instead of muddling up or darkening up the middle tones. So I can still see the detail of her face, right? And then I'm going to turn up the shadows, meaning darken them up just a little bit, okay? So that's what I would probably, and you know what, overall looking at it, I'm just going to increase that exposure just a little bit. Sometimes once you make the brights, the lights, the highlights, and the shadows, once you stretch them out, make them a little more intense, you'll notice that you can go ahead and up the exposure a little bit, and it does make it look overall better. So that would be my final version of this photo. Would I do all of this for some boring photo of my sister eating breakfast? Probably not, but would I do this for an important photo? Absolutely. So any kind of photo that I send to anyone, family members, anything that I post, I use whatever tools I have available or whatever tools that I need to make that photo actually be correct before I send it out. I would never, ever send out an orangey, photo like what I had at the beginning. So let's see if I cancel all this out. We're going to go back and see what the original photo looked like. Right? So you can see there's a lot of differences between the original and my edits. So anyway, have fun with that. I'll see you in class.